Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. Amid growing fears that a new front could be opening in the U.S. war with Iran, with an Iranian-backed proxy group threatening to shut down another critical waterway in the region, causing fuel prices to jump. Overnight, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen saying they struck 2 tankers in the Red Sea as the group threatens another critical choke point for global shipping. In a post on social media, President Trump condemning the attack and threatening, quote, major military punishment on both Iran and the Houthis. Now, as a result, oil prices have jumped, closing around $92 a barrel today, while Brent oil, the international benchmark, rose to over $100 a barrel today for the first time since May. Gas prices here at home remain above $4 a gallon and climbing as the Trump administration shows no signs of backing down from its military confrontation with Iran or its threat to strike civilian infrastructure.
Do you rule out striking civilian infrastructure?
I think I saw, guys, I saw Arachi, their foreign minister, who the other day say or something about their policies, an eye for an eye. The president's policy is a head for an eye. I mean, honestly, that's what it's going to be. I mean, they will pay a very heavy price for the things they're doing. They're already paying a very heavy price.
The debate over the war also featuring prominently on Capitol Hill today, with the House passing a resolution directing the president to remove U.S. armed forces from the hostilities. The Senate blocked a similar resolution. Meanwhile, the political fallout is intensifying ahead of the midterms, with a majority of Americans disapproving of the president's handling of the war in Iran. That's according to new polling from Fox News. And as energy prices once again climb higher, almost 3/4 of Americans say they disapprove of the president's handling of inflation. That includes 43% of Republicans. You see the numbers right there. Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, and Hooman, an Iranian-American writer and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Gabe, let me begin with you. The president has repeatedly said that Iran wants to make a deal. He's also said Iran is not ready to make a deal. How is he squaring the two? What are officials telling you?
Well, Kristen, administration officials have basically been trying to explain this away by saying, look, there are different factions to the Iranian leadership. But you're right, the president and even today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that the Iranians are desperate to make a deal, that they're begging to do so. But then Secretary Rubio said that they end up breaking that deal. So they're not really serious when coming to the negotiating table. So there are a lot of questions about how this moves forward and whether we're in any position right now that there are serious negotiations underway. The administration giving those conflicting messages, saying at one point that, yes, they do want to make a deal, but then saying that they break it after any agreement is reached, Kristen.
Well, it's notable because the president is also threatening major military punishment on Iran and on the Houthis as well. But, Gabe, the midterms are less than 4 months away. Is the president really prepared to expand this war in this very moment?
Look, the president and senior White House officials, what they continue to emphasize is that the president does believe that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and that he is not taking the midterms into consideration when he decides what to do next. Now, the president telling Axios today that he is, quote, close to a decision on what could be a massive attack inside Iran, that the Iranians haven't felt enough pain. But, Kristen, this is something he's been saying for several days now. You remember last week he said in an interview that he was considering attacks on civilian infrastructure on bridges and power plants inside Iran. Earlier this week, he said that if there were continued attacks by Iran on the Strait of Hormuz on commercial ships, that there would be attacks on power plants, on bridges. And you heard what you played in the introduction there, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, that it's a policy of this administration, not an eye for an eye, but a head for an eye. So certainly the president continuing to make these threats no matter how close we are to those midterm elections, Kristen.
Really striking language from the Secretary of State. Gabe, stay with us. I'm going to get back to you in just a moment. But Richard Engel, let me turn to you in the region. As I laid out at the top, the Iran-backed Houthi rebels said they struck 2 tankers in the Red Sea. Based on your reporting, Richard, is this now a new front in the Iran war? How should we be thinking about this moment?
It is a new front. The Houthis have generally been staying out of this for the last several months. For 5 months now, we've been focusing on the Strait of Hormuz, and this has really been a battle. President Trump talks a lot about the nuclear program, but this has really been a battle over the Strait of Hormuz. Who gets to control the Strait of Hormuz? And Iran believes, after its performance during this war, that it has earned the right to not only control the Strait of Hormuz, but also to seek economic benefit from controlling the Strait of Hormuz. It wants to impose maritime fees, toll fees, security fees on ships that pass through Hormuz, and has been attacking vessels that don't take routes that Iran says are the designated routes that it allows. So because of the focus on the Strait of Hormuz, many countries have been shifting their traffic, trying to use the alternative route, trying to use the Red Sea passageway, which is responsible for about 12% of all global commerce. And now the Houthis say they fired on these 2 ships. It was condemned by Secretary of State Rubio. It was condemned by Pakistani mediators. What's not clear is if they intend to attack all ships that go through the Red Sea. So far, they have mostly been focusing on Saudi vessels, and the Iranians have specifically been pointing to their enmity with Saudi Arabia. Don't forget that Saudi Arabia fought a war against the Houthis for several years inside Yemen, so there is personal animus there. But it is a new front. We've already seen oil prices rising, and here in Israel, they are bracing for an escalation. For the first time in several weeks, they have started clearing out the bomb shelters again, opening bomb shelters to the public in several key cities in this country, including in neighborhoods in Tel Aviv. The defense minister said that if Iran attacks Israel, it will pay a devastating price. That was after President Trump made these very overt threats to attack Iran, and says he's close to making a decision to carrying out attacks on Iran on a scale that we have not yet seen in this war. But as Gabe was saying earlier, we've heard similar threats from President Trump in the past. He's threatened to attack bridges. At one stage, he threatened to wipe out all of Iran's civilization. Here, they're getting prepared for an escalation, and we are seeing a partial opening of a second front in this conflict that is certainly rattling the markets.
Well, it is just an extraordinary moment. And I think the big question, is there an off-ramp? Do you get the sense, Richard, based on your conversations, that there is an off-ramp? Are the negotiations halted at this point, stalled?
So I spoke to a senior Arab official today who's directly involved in the conflict, directly involved in the negotiations. And the word that he used to me was, it's a mess. He said that we are right now in a Mexican standoff with the two sides pointing guns at each other, both prepared to fire, and that if both fire, both are in the position to potentially kill each other. So no, diplomacy is not moving well, and people see this as a spiral that is escalating, not de-escalating.
All right, Richard Engel reporting live from Jerusalem. Richard, thank you so much. We really appreciate your reporting. As always, let me turn to Courtney Kube, who's here at the desk with me. So, Courtney, take me inside your conversations with Pentagon officials. What type of targets are they looking at when you're thinking about counterattacks against Houthi rebels?
So the Houthis don't actually have much of a maritime presence. So they have some small boats that they can take out a little ways off of the coast of Yemen. But the majority of the threat from them is land-based. So the Iranians have been providing them with money and training and weapons, equipment for years now. They have developed a bit of a missile arsenal, and some of those are longer-range missiles. The problem is, while they have guidance systems, they're not very accurate. So the majority of the time, they'll fire off missiles, they'll fire off drones. They even have some autonomous sort of drone boats that they can send out packed with explosives. The majority of the time, they don't actually make it to their target. That being said, the U.S. military, in the past, when they have threatened shipping, because they have been doing this now consistently on and off since, I mean, the October 7th attacks was when they really started ramping up some of their attacks in the shipping area. But the majority of the time, the U.S. responds in Yemen, going after Houthi storage facilities where they launch their missiles, launch their drones, where they store them. The one thing about the Houthis, a lot of their stuff is buried underground. It is very hard to find. So even in the past, when we've seen the United States take dozens, hundreds of strikes, it is difficult to degrade their capabilities.
Well, and following up on that point, I mean, you've really been reporting on what type of capabilities the U.S. has for counterattacks. When you're talking about Houthi rebels, do they have the capabilities ready to actually engage in this type of tit-for-tat?
They absolutely do. And one thing that's similar to what we've been talking about in the Strait of Hormuz is even just the fact that they start threatening commercial shipping is enough to have a deterrent effect. We've seen that happen in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran doesn't have to necessarily hit these ships. They just need to threaten them to the point where the companies and the insurance companies no longer want to send them through. One big difference, though, between Strait of Hormuz, after the October 7th attacks, starting about a month later, the Houthis really started threatening shipping. We saw the U.S. take a series of strikes over the next 2 years, really, to try to degrade that, and then sort of this tenuous ceasefire that existed. Throughout that entire time, commercial shipping has really rerouted out of that area already. So it's never been back to where it was back in earlier 2023. Many of those commercial ships now go all the way around the southern coast of Africa, and just take the longer. It's built into their timeline. It's built into their costs. It's become the preferred ship or the preferred route for most of those ships.
Well, and so, Court, let's talk big picture here, because the U.S. has been striking Iran for 12 consecutive days now. Talk about the scope, the force of these strikes.
Yeah. And what's surprising is the strikes have primarily targeted the same basic area and the same basic things. So coastal radar sites, drone launching facilities. There have been one or two strikes against infrastructure, more of those sort of dual use, what the military considers dual use. So areas where the Iranian military, and particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are able to resupply bridges, potentially roads, those sorts of things. What seems strange, though, is I spoke with military officials about this today. There have been many more military targets than there have been locations. So while it's only potentially dozens of military locations, there have been hundreds of actual targets and actual strikes at those locations, which would indicate to me that Iran is able to reconstitute at those locations, bring in mobile launchers, mobile facilities, and so that they can continue to threaten the strait in that way.
All right, Courtney Kube, as always, thank you so much for being on set. Really appreciate it. Great to see you, as always. Gabe, let me go back out to you at the White House, if I could. I want to get your take on this nuclear agreement the United States just signed with Saudi Arabia. The president on social media now placing new conditions on that agreement, saying Saudi Arabia needs to join the Abraham Accords as a part of that deal. So what's the status of this agreement, Gabe? Is it actually finalized?
Well, Kristen, it was presented as finalized yesterday, and then the president seemingly throwing that monkey wrench in it earlier today with that surprise social media post, throwing that extra condition that Saudi Arabia needs to be part of the Abraham Accords, essentially normalizing relations with Israel, something that has long been an issue across the region. And as Saudi Arabia has previously said that it would not consider unless there was a Palestinian state, something that has been a non-starter, obviously, in the past. I pressed White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about this earlier today in the briefing room. Let's listen to what she said.
Why was that condition not mentioned yesterday when the Energy Secretary announced it?
Well, look, the president is always the final deal maker, as you know, and this is something that he has mentioned on numerous occasions going back. I can provide you with those statements, and he has said if they don't join the Abraham Accords, the deal is off. So we'll continue to have those conversations with our Saudi counterparts moving forward.
So the deal is dead if Saudi Arabia doesn't join. And have you any indication that Saudi Arabia is even considering this?
Again, the president has spoken directly with the Saudis about this in numerous conversations in the past, and the administration will continue to engage in those conversations.
Now, Leavitt went on to say, Kristen, that the president had not spoken with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, since his post on social media. She also seemed to indicate that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not play a role in that abrupt change. But As I said, this was initially presented when it was announced by the Energy Secretary yesterday as a finalized agreement pending congressional approval. Now it's really up in the air, Chris.
Yeah, interesting bit of whiplash there. Gabe Gutierrez at the White House for us. Gabe, thank you so very much. Hooman Maj, let me turn to you now. And I want to ask you for how you are viewing this moment. As I was just discussing with my colleague, Courtney Kube, the United States has been attacking Iran for 12 days consecutively. There does not seem to be an off-ramp. How would you describe the current state of play between the United States and Iran?
Well, it's pretty bad. I mean, that we know. The Iranians aren't going to give up very easily. It doesn't matter. I mean, it depends on what President Trump means when he says he's going to hit them harder than they've ever been hit before. Well, they've been hit pretty hard. It's pretty astonishing how much ordnance has been dropped on Iran, how many missiles, how many bombs, and yet Iran is resilient. Whether we like it or not, they're resilient and they can threaten the Strait of Hormuz for the long-term future, really, because unless you change the regime, which at one point seemed to have been one of the goals of this war, Iran will always have the ability to threaten ships. As Richard pointed out, and as Courtney has pointed out, you don't actually have to hit a ship, but if the threat is there, a lot of ships aren't going to want to take the risk. So right now, the state of relations is horrible. I mean, the president of the United States says that Iran really wants a deal. The Iranians are saying, no, we're not asking for a deal. In fact, we're not even thinking about a deal. According to the mediators, the Pakistanis, the Omanis, the Qataris, all are, allies of the United States and are trying very hard to bring this to a ceasefire, a new ceasefire. But Iran is not particularly interested in giving up the one advantage it has here, and that is control of de facto control of the Strait of Hormuz. So it's going to be a mess unless President Trump, backs down or agrees to, have another memorandum of understanding. The real problem with the memorandum, which was signed in a hurried fashion, was that the interpretation on the Iranian side was very different from the interpretation on the U.S. side. The U.S. believed that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be wide open and then was starting to escort ships through the southern route, avoiding the Iranian route. The Iranians say, paragraph 5, wait a sec, that says that everything that goes through, we're not going to charge a toll because we agreed not to for 60 days, but everything that goes through the strait, according to that paragraph, has to be coordinated with us. So with these ships going silent and being escorted by the U.S. Navy, the Iranians argue, that this was a violation of the memorandum. And as we know, then what happened is President Trump wants to reinstate, or did reinstate, the blockade and has started the war, really basically restarted the war. So I think it's a huge problem. I don't know where you were asking about an off-ramp. I don't see one unless President Trump decides he wants to take one. They're there for the taking. President Trump is remarkably good at making things look good for his base, look good for the Republican Party, saying we defeated them. We're talking about the nuclear program. There is no nuclear program in Iran. Let's face it, it doesn't exist. There are elements there. There is the capability of restarting it at some point. But as President Trump himself has said, if they restart it, we'll know, and we can bomb them again. So there is no nuclear program. The only thing that's there is the regime is still there. Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the regime, because I wonder how that is factoring into just how complicated it is to get a memorandum of understanding which all sides agree to the terms. You still have Iran's supreme leader, a lot of questions about the role that he is playing, the IRGC. Right. How complicating are these various factions, and who do you think the supreme leader is actually listening to around him?
Well, he's not meeting with a lot of people. Even Araghchi, Foreign Minister Araghchi, who you've interviewed, has said that he, just recently, in the last couple of days, has said that he has not personally met with him. So for security reasons, they're keeping that extremely, extremely tight, the circle around the new supreme leader. So he has not appeared in public. He's presumably underground somewhere. The president, Pezeshkian, has said he has met with him. We have to remember what Iran has is a Supreme National Security Council. And in that council, the president of Iran is there, Pezeshkian. The head of the IRGC is there. Ghalibaf, who is currently the current negotiator with the United States when there are negotiations. And he's the Speaker of Parliament, very powerful, former Revolutionary Guard commander. And these people come up with what is the policy, what is foreign policy. You know, Araghchi, the foreign minister, really is the regime's foreign minister, not just the government's foreign minister. So these people get together, and presumably some of them, the head of the Revolutionary Guard, the president, do speak with the supreme leader, and they come to some sort of agreement of what the policy is going to be. So even though there are people on the outside, there's, for example, this Paydari front in Iran, which is very hard line, and they oppose all negotiations, but still the main people, the Supreme National Security Council, don't oppose negotiations as long as it's in their control.
All right. Hooman Maj, thank you so much for your incredible insights. We really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.